I want to pick up, annual reviews have been around in some companies for a number of years, but the comprehensive review is relatively new. And we've got a number on this table that have had some experience with that. And maybe just share with our audience some commentary around the process and some suggestions of how they might go about it. Because in my view, it's a significant shift. It used to be management did something and a little involvement of the audit committee. I think there's a shift towards what the audit committee leadership role is around this. But thoughts and comments on that? Maybe I'll start with you, Eileen. I know, David, you've been through this, so comments?
Yeah, I've been through 4 of them now. And interestingly enough, not just in large public companies. Certainly, we did one at Teachers when I was still chair there. I've done one at the University Health Network, the hospital complex in Toronto, coincident with a partner retirement. And it was just a really good exercise to do. And even though they're not a public company, obviously their statements are public and they get a lot of regulated scrutiny. So it was a very good exercise. In Intact, we actually used a retired partner from one accounting firm to help us review the performance of our auditors. It was actually a great thing. We got a lot out of it. I think the audit committee got a lot out of it. Management got a lot out of it. And I think one of the things that's useful is to prepare a kind of template questionnaire that you can send out to everybody, get them all to comment on the things that are important, and having somebody to operate as a sort of secretariat for all that and stay independent and objective about it, I thought was a great experience.
David, any tips?
Well, I think the benefit of the comprehensive review is you can use it very strategically, because in our case, it was time for the audit partner to rotate. And what we said to ourselves is, where do we think we are going to be in 5 years? Where do we think Teachers is going to be in 5 years? So as we're going further in emerging markets, do we have a firm and an audit partner that actually has international experience, that can help us with the risks, that has lived overseas? Things like that, when we looked at the audit partner criteria. And when we looked at the firm itself, we said, given the industry we're in, are they one of the top tier firms? Can they support us going forward in all the endeavors that we want to do? And so it was a really great exercise for us to look at that. The one thing I will say about fees is you get what you pay for. And when you look at the CPAB reports, often the deficiencies are all around areas of judgment. And the average staff member on an audit team has less than 5 years experience. 80% have less than 5 years experience. So if you're looking at that, you'd want to pay for the more experienced people who have the judgment, who have the industry knowledge, in order that it is a quality audit. So I really believe that fees are very important. I think, as Eileen said, it's important to get value for money, but also you don't want to fool yourself in thinking that you can get a bargain when in fact you aren't getting a bargain. You're actually exposing the audit committee to a lot of risk.
John.
Don, just one comment, not so much related to the 5-year review because I haven't been through that, but one thing I know we do at Economical is we do a pretty comprehensive annual review, but part of that is the auditors are asked to self-assess themselves. And before we release any of our report to them, we have them report to us on how they see themselves as having done against their plan and their commitment to us. So just a suggestion.
David, it was interesting you mentioned audit quality indicators. I think you've got another one there in terms of the experience of the staff. Yep. Obviously, is one of the pieces. I think it's going to be interesting on this concept of audit quality indicators. In the U.S., they've been working at it. They've actually got 28 measures, and you start saying, boy, how do you manage that? And then if there's an expectation to publish that, I think there's a lot of risk around unintended consequences. So hoping that's not the direction we head, but I do think there's some good suggestions around having a better discussion with your audit firm around audit quality. One thing I will say, I believe that these 5-year reviews has actually sharpened the focus. It used to be service and no surprises and all those sort of good things, but it has brought the discussion back to audit quality, which I think is probably a pretty positive piece in development. The audit report, I wanted to pick up a bit on that. Cameron, you said internationally. What are you hearing around that? It's got momentum in Europe.
Well, sure, it's got momentum internationally. The auditor's report, that's now an expanded auditor's report, will be effective in the next couple of years. And in Canada, we're trying to figure out how to implement that. Our Canadian standard setter is trying to figure out how to implement that. But this new audit report will have areas of key audit matters. So if impairment was a big topic in the audit and the auditor spent a lot of time on that topic, it will show up in the auditor's report. So, I mean, I take Eileen's point. There's different views on this. How useful is this information? My experience over the past 10 years has been that investors want more information about the audit. This is what the international standard setters heard. This is the response that they've come up with. So I'm supportive of the direction. Is it right for our entire capital markets? How do we introduce it in our entire capital markets, given we have a lot of smaller issuers and there's cost issues there? We have to think about that, and that's what our domestic standard setter is doing. It's soliciting input, trying to get comments on how to implement this in Canada. And of course, we have a lot of interlisted companies, and we don't quite know where the U.S. is coming out on this just yet. So maybe waiting until we get that information would be a useful step for us in Canada. So in Canada, we are proposing a bit of a delay, not aligning with the international adoption, but a year later for those reasons. I think that makes sense.
I just wanted to pick up a point that Eileen made around the audit committee reporting out. So it's one thing about having the auditor say more in the UK, where it is a requirement for those extended audit reports, and there's the big example is Rolls-Royce, the Rolls-Royce of audit reports. You can have a look at in terms of example of key audit matters and results, and I think it was quite well done. The investor community over there actually gave a pretty good review. They got into issues like materiality and everything else. But in the UK, the audit committee actually needs to talk about its role and responsibility around those things. So it's tied together. Whereas here in Canada, that's not the case. And it was interesting, Eileen, you mentioned you would support that. I know when the exposure draft came out, the work around CPAB and CPA, we had suggested that perhaps that's a good way to go. A number of the directors here in Canada resisted that direction.
Well, I don't know why you would resist it when, in fact, the statements are before you. I mean, the result is there. You've decided that these are a fair, honest interpretation of where the company stands at a period of time, and of course, you've got the MD&A as well to talk to you about where the company might be going. I have no qualms at all about talking about how the audit committee reviewed some of the more important and significant audit matters that it came before it, and the fact is that once you've got the statement in your hand, you've got the evidence that that's where they ended up. So the question of what process you went through to get there, I don't have any problem with that at all. I'd rather do it that way than have the auditor start commenting on things over which they really, well, in my view anyway, they're getting to the place where you're coming to a very difficult situation where you don't really know whether the auditors actually have the wherewithal to make any comment. They can talk about what they figured were the most important matters, but once you start getting into value judgments, which is what some investors would like, you're never going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'd say on this one, stay tuned, because in the U.S. Right now, not required, but voluntarily, a number of the companies in the U.S. are already doing this, and there is some work that the regulators are doing to drive it. So my guess is we're going to hear more reporting. I know we're saying more is less, but there could be more audit committees to do on that. Cameron here.
Well, yeah, and in Canada, we are having some thoughts about this too. Is it time to look at our audit committee requirements? Right now, we only have a requirement that the audit committee oversees the work of the auditor, nothing else. Nobody has asked us much about that over the years, but it is becoming more of a topic of audit quality and how the audit committee can contribute to that. So is it time for us to have a look at these, scrubbing, as Eileen said? Perhaps, and we're talking about that, whether we should be doing something in this space.
Let me just, so CPAB 2003, the CPAB CPA conference in 2013 talked about 5-year reviews and whatnot. Your views, maybe I'll look to you, Eileen, do you think, well, all the panelists, whether audit quality is getting the attention and it's improving? I think CPAB is noting it's moving the right direction, obviously work to do, but your thoughts?
Well, it's getting a lot more attention from audit committees and from auditors. So the fact that they're actually talking together about that, I think, is important and progressive. So I can't imagine that there's anything negative about that.
I think, Don, that CPAB has made it very easy for the average company to look at this, because their toolkits are extremely well done and really easy to follow, and they're free. And you have one for the annual review and you have one for the 5-year review. And they're really, really easy to effect, and the process is quite straightforward. I would warn people, though, the 5-year takes a lot of time. It is something where it's a real investment, and as Eileen mentioned earlier, you might want to get outside help on that, because it is very time-consuming for management to do it all. But I really believe it is worthwhile doing, and hopefully it'll become a governance standard in the future.